"You're not a soldier, you're just another liar trying to game the system." That's what the judge said, loud, clear, in front of everyone. Not a whisper, not a warning. She said it with a smirk. And Robert Bobby Gaines just stood there, silent, holding his cap in both hands, uniform pressed, shoes polished, medals tucked away in the folder he hadn't yet opened. He didn't speak. Not yet. The courtroom was small, hot. Fluorescent lights flickered above like they were struggling to stay alive, and maybe that was the point, because justice in that room didn't feel alive either. There were 3 people in the gallery: an old woman crocheting, a man in a cheap tie pretending to check his watch, and a court officer who hadn't looked up in 20 minutes. This wasn't a trial, it wasn't a grand hearing. It was supposed to be routine, a hearing over benefits. Bobby had come to explain that the VA had misclassified his disability, that paperwork had been lost, that the delay in payment was hurting him. Rent was late, medication was being skipped, but the judge didn't see a veteran. She saw a black man. She didn't even read the full file, just skimmed the top page, huffed, and asked, "Do you even have documentation of this so-called service?" Bobby didn't flinch. He nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." His voice was calm, smooth, the kind of voice that once commanded units under gunfire. But the judge rolled her eyes. "Everyone's a hero nowadays," she muttered. "Funny how the real soldiers never end up in here whining about checks." There it was again, the word whining, the tone condescending, the implication, you people are always asking for more. Bobby looked down, tightened his grip on the cap, still didn't speak. He didn't need to. Because across the room, behind the judge's bench, one of the clerks raised an eyebrow. He looked younger, confused, maybe even uncomfortable. He saw what she didn't. The quiet restraint, the discipline, the dignity. But the judge leaned forward. "Well," she snapped, "do you have anything real to show, or should I just mark this as no substantial evidence and move on?" Bobby slowly set the cap on the table, unsnapped the folder. His hands didn't shake. Inside were the discharge papers, medical forms, a Purple Heart citation, photographs of shrapnel removed from his back, and a folded flag, still creased from the funeral of the man who died beside him. But the judge didn't look. She waved it off. "Fake papers are easy to make. I've seen it before," she said. "Your generation seems to think yelling louder makes something true." Bobby didn't yell. He simply reached into the folder again, pulled out a velvet box, opened it, and set the bronze star on the table. The courtroom went silent. Even the court officer looked up. "But the judge?" She laughed. "You expect me to believe that's yours?" She scoffed. "Anyone can buy a medal on eBay." Still, Bobby didn't speak. Not yet, because behind him the courtroom door creaked open, and someone walked in, someone who did recognize that medal, who had served with Bobby, and who wasn't about to stay silent. The door creaked louder this time. The judge didn't look. She was still scribbling something in the margins of the file, probably her decision. Probably the same one she had before Bobby even opened his mouth. But the man who walked in wasn't just a late arrival. He wore a faded army jacket, stood straight despite a cane, silver hair, dark eyes, a limp that said more than words ever could. He walked past the benches, past the gallery, stopped behind Bobby. "Excuse me, Your Honor," he said clearly, voice low, commanding, not asking for permission, just stating a fact. The judge froze mid-sentence. "Who are you?" she asked, brows raised. "Colonel Raymond Peters," he replied, "retired, 3rd Infantry Division, Iraq, 2004. She blinked. "I wasn't aware anyone else was scheduled to speak." "I wasn't scheduled," he cut in, "but I was there." Now the room shifted. The old woman with the yarn looked up. The intern stopped pretending to type. The bailiff straightened in his seat. The judge leaned back, defensive. "Well, Colonel, this is a benefits hearing, not a reunion." Raymond didn't smile. He stepped closer to Bobby's table and tapped the bronze star gently. "That's not from eBay," he said. "That's real, and he earned it. I watched him drag 2 men out of a burning Humvee while taking enemy fire." The judge scoffed. "There's a process for submitting witness statements. Bursting in like this isn't protocol. Neither is calling a decorated soldier a liar," Raymond replied, calm but steel-edged. Bobby still hadn't spoken. Not once since being called a fake, a liar, a thief. Because he didn't need to. The truth was speaking for him now. The judge tried to regain control. "Even if that were true," she said, voice tight, "Mr. Gaines hasn't proven any service-connected disability that qualifies under the 2014 standards. He claims hearing loss, but didn't submit an updated audiogram, and this court doesn't operate on sentiment." Raymond raised an eyebrow. "You ever hear an IED go off 3 feet from your left ear, Judge?" Silence. "Because I have. So has he. And trust me, an audiogram doesn't capture the nights he wakes up screaming, thinking we're still out there." Still, the judge didn't move. Didn't flinch, didn't even blink. I don't have time for theatrics, she said sharply. If Mr. Gaines can't present current verifiable documentation, I will have to reject the claim. This is about regulations, not emotions. And there it was. The line, the wall, the same one Bobby had run into at every office, every call, every appeal. Forms, deadlines, missing files, excuses. He sat quietly watching her, but now his eyes narrowed. He reached again into the folder, slowly. This time he pulled out a small torn envelope. Inside was a letter, faded, smudged with time, signed by a medic, stating injuries sustained, combat witnessed, and medical evacuation logged. Dated 2004, stamped official. Bobby slid it forward, not a word. The judge took it, skimming fast, then slower, then stopped. For the first time, her pen wasn't moving. Her jaw tightened. But still, she doubled down. This doesn't change the fact that he didn't follow proper channels for appeal, she snapped. And this court has the discretion to determine what qualifies as substantial proof. We can't allow every sob story. Colonel Peters stepped forward again. Sob story? He repeated. You think combat trauma is a story? He turned to the room. Man gets shot at for your freedom, loses his hearing, comes home to sleep on a couch, and you call him a liar? No one spoke. Even the bailiff stood now, hands clenched at his belt. But before anything else could be said, the judge reached for her gavel. I'm ending this hearing. I've made my decision. She raised the gavel. But before it could come down, Bobby stood, slowly, calmly. And finally he spoke. You haven't seen everything yet. The gavel froze in midair. The judge stared at Bobby like he had no right to interrupt her. But he had stood, straight, steady, like he had on the tarmac that night in Baghdad, like he had when he carried another man's blood on his back just to save him. You haven't seen everything yet, he repeated, his voice even. The judge set the gavel down, slowly. You are dangerously close to being held in contempt, Mr. Gaines. Bobby didn't blink. He reached into the folder again, one final time. This time it wasn't a document. It was a flash drive. He held it up. I brought this just in case someone decided my life wasn't real, he said. You want evidence? Watch this. He looked to the clerk. Court exhibits can include video. That's still the law, right? The young clerk hesitated, glanced at the judge. She didn't say no, so Bobby handed it over. The clerk inserted the drive. A few keystrokes later, the courtroom screen flickered on. It was grainy, old footage, dated in the corner, August 17, 2000. A helmet camera, shaky, loud, gunfire crackling like popcorn, voices shouting. Then, Bobby, on screen, dragging a screaming soldier from the wreckage of a flipped Humvee. Fire exploding behind them, shrapnel in the air, blood on his face. And then the moment. He stopped to cover the man with his own vest, then turned and ran back into the fire for another. The screen froze, paused on Bobby's face, covered in soot, eyes wide, alive. No one in the courtroom moved, not even the judge. Bobby turned. That was Kandahar, he said softly. Same mission that left me with permanent hearing loss and fragments in my spine. He let that sit. Do I still need a recent audiogram, Your Honor? The judge shifted in her seat, but instead of backing down, she straightened up, cold, controlled. I see, she said. That footage may be compelling, but there are protocols for submitting it. I don't make decisions based on drama. There it was again, drama. As if war was just a performance, as if survival was entertainment, as if his pain, his sacrifice was some show for her courtroom. Colonel Peters laughed under his breath, bitter. You really gonna say that after watching a man run into fire? The judge ignored him. She reached for the file again. Regardless, she continued, this hearing isn't to relive war stories. It's to determine eligibility based on the latest paperwork. And based on what I see, there are still inconsistencies. She looked up, smiled, like she'd just won. So unless you can prove you meet the full eligibility guidelines under Code 748B Revision 3, my decision stands. And that was it, her final word. She picked up the gavel again, raised it. But Bobby didn't sit down. He didn't plead. He didn't explain. He just turned to the gallery and nodded. The back doors opened again. Two men walked in, suits, ties, badges. One carried a sealed envelope. The other carried a military briefcase. They walked straight to the bench. The courtroom gasped. The judge's smile cracked. The man with the envelope placed it on the bench. Your Honor, he said calmly, we're from the Department of Veterans Affairs, Internal Review Division. He tapped the folder. We received an anonymous tip that this hearing might be in violation of federal code regarding prejudicial treatment of decorated veterans. The judge's face drained of color. This is irregular. The second man cut her off. We've reviewed the case file. We've seen the video. We're here to observe the remainder of this hearing under Title 38 Review Authority. And just like that, she wasn't in control anymore. The courtroom had shifted. The judge wasn't holding the gavel. She was holding a problem. And everyone saw it. The judge's fingers twitched. She tried to keep her voice level, but the room had already shifted. She wasn't above it anymore. "You brought federal officers into my courtroom?" she snapped. "They're not here for theatrics," Bobby said, his voice calm. "They're here for the truth." He stepped back from the bench and let the men in suits handle it. The taller one opened his case and produced documents with government seals. The other handed over a formal complaint envelope. "We received a report that a decorated veteran's case was being mishandled," the lead officer said. "We were told to observe today's proceedings." The judge scoffed. "By who?" A pause. Then Bobby answered, clear and simple. "By me." The judge blinked. "You?" He nodded. "I was appointed by the governor's office 2 years ago as a veteran liaison officer. My duty is to document mistreatment of combat veterans in state-level judicial procedures. I've visited 7 counties, sat in 52 courtrooms. Yours is the first where I've been called a liar before presenting my case." A gasp rippled through the gallery. Even the bailiff took a step back. The clerk's jaw dropped. But the judge wasn't done yet. She tried to recover, leaning into the one thing she still thought she had: authority. "Well, if you are indeed some liaison, Mr. Gaines, you should know you're violating procedure." "Procedure?" the VA officer cut in. "The only one violating anything here is you, Judge Hamilton." She froze. That name hit her like a slap, because it wasn't Your Honor anymore. It was just Hamilton, exposed, human, vulnerable. "You failed to review the evidence," the officer continued. "You spoke dismissively, and you called a Bronze Star recipient a liar in open court." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Then the other VA officer stepped forward. "We've contacted your district supervisor," he said, his voice steady. "A formal ethics investigation is being opened effective immediately." The judge stared at him, at Bobby, at the folder, at the frozen image of Bobby on the screen, smoke rising behind him, blood on his face, carrying another man to safety. And for the first time, she looked scared. "You can't. This is my courtroom," she whispered. "Not anymore," Bobby said. He didn't say it with rage. He didn't yell. He said it like a man who's spent his whole life following rules others ignore, like a man who's finally done asking for dignity. One of the VA agents turned to the clerk. "Please log this hearing as evidence, all transcripts and footage, and notify your department head." The clerk nodded, still wide-eyed. Colonel Peters finally stepped forward again. "You just insulted the wrong man, Judge," he said. "He didn't need this hearing. You did." And that was the truth, because Bobby already had everything he needed to prove his case. The video, documents, the rank. This hearing wasn't for him anymore. It was for everyone watching, everyone who'd ever been silenced, dismissed, called a liar. And now, they weren't quiet anymore. The room was frozen. No one breathed. No one moved. Even the fluorescent lights above seemed to hum more quietly. The judge, now just Hamilton, stood stiff behind her bench, stripped of authority, staring at the 2 federal officers who now held the room in their hands. The taller agent laid the final document flat on the table before her. It was crisp, freshly printed. "Effective immediately, you are under internal investigation by the State Judicial Review Board for misconduct involving a combat veteran," he said. "You are to suspend all judicial activity until further notice." Her hand twitched toward the gavel, but it was too late. The power had shifted. No robe, no title, no shield, just consequences. The second officer spoke now, quieter, but with weight behind every word. "We've also forwarded this case to the Office of Veteran Affairs Inspector General. Should further evidence emerge of discrimination, the penalties will be federal." The judge swallowed hard. "You can't. This isn't how this is supposed to work." But no one answered, because deep down, she already knew. This is how it was supposed to work. This is what justice looks like when it finally stands up for the right person. She slowly gathered her papers, her pen, her shattered pride. And as she turned to leave, Bobby spoke. Only once, only 5 words. Words that landed like a stone dropped in still water. "I forgive you, Judge Hamilton." The gallery murmured, not out of shock, but out of respect. Because it takes power to confront hate, but it takes character to leave it behind. The judge paused in the doorway. She didn't turn back. She didn't say thank you. She just left. Maybe ashamed, maybe stunned, or maybe still convinced she was the victim. Didn't matter, because the real story wasn't about her anymore. It was about the man still standing at the center of the room, the man who came seeking dignity and brought down an empire of disrespect. The clerk stepped forward, cleared his throat. "I'm instructed to read a statement from the State Veterans Affairs Office," he said, voice a little shaky. He unfolded the letter. "We extend our public apology to Mr. Robert Gaines for the mistreatment he received in this courtroom. We recognize his service, his sacrifice, and his strength." He looked up. The whole room stood, one by one. Even the bailiff, even the woman with the yarn, even the court officer who hadn't spoken once. They all stood for Bobby. He didn't cry, didn't smile. He just nodded. then picked up his cap, his folder, and his medals, and walked out, one slow, deliberate step at a time. Not a victim, not a liar, but a soldier, a survivor, a symbol. And just before he reached the door, Colonel Peters called out to him. "Hey, Bobby." He turned. The old soldier grinned. "Next time someone doubts you, show him that video first." Bobby smiled, just barely. "Next time," he said, "they won't get the chance." And with that, he stepped out into the sunlight, and justice followed him.